What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the early read. Our final conference preview is here. The little conference that could, the MAC, the Masters of the Midweek. We are here, and to do this, I brought on a guy. When I started betting college football, I would stumble on, I think, like a lot of bettors, onto the covers forums, and I found StepOnADuck to be one of the more insightful. When you sift through all the stuff on that website, I found StepOnADuck's forums to be super informative, super successful. And as I was on Twitter during the summer, I stumbled onto his Twitter page. I never even thought to even search him on Twitter. So StepOnADuck is here to preview the MAC. He still is on covers. So Duck, thank you for joining the show. I know you're on the podcast circuit here, so it seems like people are starting to take notice of your great work. So thanks for joining the show, man. How's it going?
Man, what an intro. Thanks, Reed. I really appreciate the kind words and thrilled to be on your podcast today. And golly, we're 25 days or so away from getting started. I can't wait for kickoff.
Yeah, this should be a good one. So I'm excited. So before we talk Mac, how did you get started? Because I know this isn't, I don't know what you do for a living. You don't have to share, but your start in terms of betting on college football, posting about it, keeping up with posting about it. Because I know me, I've graduated strong word, because I don't think anybody necessarily graduates, but I know the covers forum has kind of transitioned through years and people have stopped going on that. I just went back and looked at yours because I saw that you were still on there, but what brought you to covers and how long have you been going about this?
Yeah, so I got my teeth cut in sports betting in 2008. I've been really serious about it and really intent about it since about 2012. And getting into it for the first time, I just stumbled upon some of the gambling related forums and was looking for all of the best content that I could possibly find. And that wasn't always found on covers. And so I found some other forums and some other strategic ways to go about getting that content, and kind of turn that on its head and started to post my plays and my reasoning and rationale to become sharper and get feedback from other people. And if you spend enough time around the forums, you'll find the people that are sharp and that are worth getting feedback from. And overall, that sort of community has just helped me to kind of refine my craft and just find ways to beat the books, which is what it's really all about. So I'm a big believer that if you lurk around the forums long enough and if you look hard enough, you can find some diamonds in the rough there.
Yeah, and I think, again, I don't go on covers really at all anymore, but I do think it's the same thing in really any, like, I know gambling, Twitter's huge. If you kind of look through and you find the right rabbit hole, almost, you can stumble onto some really smart people posting about really smart things. I mean, it's the same thing how I found you, and I know that you have a very long track record of success. So I'm really happy to have you on the pod. And we're talking about a great conference that is the MAC. So without further ado, let's get into it. The MAC, got a defending champion, Miami, Ohio. So the MAC, small change. There are no more divisions. They are doing 4 3-team pods to maintain rivalries, but this is going to go more in the best 2 teams model. There's no more division, so there's no necessarily, like, if one division's a little bit stronger than the other, do you go for the team that's weaker, maybe gets an easier path? It's just straight up the 2 best teams go to the conference championship game. Last year's champ, Miami, Ohio, they are the favorite. I pulled this from FanDuel. They are plus 230 to win the conference. That's pretty much right around the market number. Win total 7.5. Find that shaded towards the over. This was a team last year. I mean, a nationally renowned defense, arguably the best special teams in the entire country. Their kicker, Graham Nicholson, the Groza Award winner. He's off to Alabama to let you know how good this special team was. And their coordinator, Kyle Boliker, I butcher that name, but he's off now. Or I'm sorry, that's who's replacing them. They need to replace their special teams coordinator from last year's off to Pitt. They bring in Boliker from Tennessee. So a bit of a turnover there. The offense does bring back Brett Gabbert, but Gabbert, injury concerns, it's 2 years now. They hasn't been able to stay healthy. Avion Smith, the capable backup, is gone. Amos, the running back, is gone. So there's some turnover here, but Miami's the favorite. Duck, are you with this, that you agree they should be the favorite, or do you think maybe there's some value looking further down the board here?
Miami's been the epitome of consistency in the MAC under Chuck Martin, and they are super comfortable in low-scoring defensive battles. They have exceptional special teams year in and year out. And some of those losses on offense could be what maybe has them come back to the rest of the pack this year in the MAC. I think the running back Amos being lost to go into P4 is a huge loss. They lost their best receiver too, Lavardane,
Yep.
and there's going to be a little bit of uncertainty on who's going to step up in the skill position. And they've got the best quarterback in the MAC, Blaine Gabbert, and he's been there for a long time, but can he stay healthy, right? And do they feel solid enough in their number 2 guy behind him if he does go down? He's gone down every year in the last couple of years. He hasn't played a full season. And so I think when you look at the MAC and you look at the teams they have to play in their schedule, golly, I'm not running to the window to bet the shortest favorite in the MAC in a league that's full of parity. There's a lot of coaching continuity in the league. And while they're the best team in the MAC, I'm not so sure that they're the team I would want to put my money on.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And again, not saying that there's going to be a significant drop off, but it's, do you want to tie up your money for this long on a team that's basically 2-1 to win the conference? Backup, I mean, you got Maddox Kopp. He's played in a game last year, really no time. He's been to Colorado and Houston. Henry Hessen, he also saw some time over the years, but like really just not sure that you're there. Yeah, there's not a lot there. The schedule, they go to Toledo. I would say the schedule, it doesn't do them a lot of favors because they get a week 2 bye and they come out of a bye and they play Cincinnati and at Notre Dame. So you're going to see maybe some wear and tear as you get down through because you're playing 7 straight games after that week 2 bye. So I think, do I think this team is going to be good? Yes. Like, I don't think we're going to see a huge drop off to 4 wins as long as Gabbert stays on the field, because I think the defense should be pretty healthy. They returned their top 2 linebackers, Salopek, who had over 140 tackles. I just think it might be natural regression. They were top 20 in third down percentage allowed, 18th in red zone touchdown percentage allowed. They were allowed touchdowns on 48% of opponent trips inside the red zone. Defensive line, still a little undersized. They were 94th in line yards last year, so you could run on them. It was more bend, don't break than anything else. So I think this team is good. I think the schedule doesn't do them any favors, and I believe it's now over a decade that a team hasn't gone back-to-back in the MAC. So not that there's any sort of rhyme or reason to that, but I think that more is a testament to how close together these teams really are and like how hard it is to really repeat when you don't have a significant edge anywhere. So all that to be said, I think there's nothing to do here and really nothing sticks out. I think interested in playing against them, maybe we'll find a winner as we discuss throughout the pod.
Yeah, and I think a couple things are happening, right, with the landscape of college football changing, and you've got the NIL and the transfer portal that are just wreaking havoc on these group of 5 leagues, and you're finding that the best talent in the MAC year in and year out is now getting poached to the G5, and so how do you backfill that? And so the coaches in this league are having to pivot and having to adapt and not only go out and recruit the significant areas in the MAC, Toledo, Cleveland, Chicago, Pennsylvania, those areas, but they now have to recruit their own locker room just to keep guys that are solid performers on their team. So it's becoming a lot more difficult to remain consistent in the MAC, and their schedule doesn't do them any favors either. You mentioned the schedule for Miami of Ohio. At Northwestern, they're playing a Big Ten foe to open up the season. It's maybe a game they could win. I think the line on that's about 4.5. Then they get a week 2 bye. And then that Cincinnati game is interesting because that's a big rivalry for Miami of Ohio. They won last year for the first time in about 10 years. And then
in overtime also. That was a big upset. I believe they were like a double-digit dog there on the road.
Then they go to the Cathedral, right? And how many of those Ohio kids, it's moderately close to Notre Dame, and I'm sure that they're going to be thrilled to play in that stadium. I wouldn't think that they're going to win that game, but it's a lot of pomp and circumstance around that. And then they play UMass, and UMass gave them a game last year. I know that Miami of Ohio won by 13, but that was a 3-point game in the fourth quarter in a game that had weird circumstances. There was a big weather delay. It started at 3 o'clock Eastern, and it finished after midnight. And so it was kind of a weird situation there. But then their MAC schedule opens up at Toledo, at EMU. So we'll find out right away, with Miami of Ohio, if the wear and tear was too much in the non-conference. So I definitely believe Miami will be there and be right in the thick of it during the last couple of weeks of the season with a chance to get back to Detroit. But too short of favorites for me to want to put any substantial money on.
100%. And you mentioned, maintaining these players and how you're basically working two jobs, right? You got to coach your team you have and maintain the team at the same time. Amos, the running back, he's off to Ole Miss, and Larvadane, he's off to South Carolina. So they're not just moving up to Power 4, they're moving up to SEC ball. So that just shows the kind of talent a team like Miami of Ohio, who doesn't really recruit at a national level, is. A team that I think we could agree, Duck, is the most talented team year in and year out under Jason Candle is Toledo. I think that this team has, if we're going to say there's a team that could win on just talent, it's probably Toledo. I'm not a huge Jason Candle fan as a coach, but I think he knows how to recruit at this level. Toledo's now the second favorite. Bit of a change in circumstance over the past several years where they've been the favorite year in and year out. They won 2 years ago, lost in the MAC title game last year. It's a do-over now, though. This team is outside the top 100 in returning production. They lose a ton of bodies. They lose DeQuan Finn to Baylor. They lose Penny Boone, who's now at UCF. I would say offensive line is probably the biggest concern for me just because it's unproven, but there's still talent there. Defense, also outside the top 100 in returning production. But to me, there's talent on the line that I think the defense should be fine, even if it's not as good. They were top 10 in EPA per pass, and they had a first-round cornerback in Quinyon Mitchell leave. So there's going to be a bit of some growing pains there. But, Doc, I think that this is a different type of situation for Toledo where Jason Candle probably needs to coach a little bit. Not that he doesn't coach, but not that he coaches at such a high level, in my opinion. Can Jason Candle maybe put this team together to rightfully return as the favorite? Or do you think that maybe this is a year that this gets away from them and maybe this is a year we see a step back from the Rockets?
Yeah, well, it was a good sum up on Toledo. They year in and year out have the best talent in the MAC. Yeah. They recruit well in their areas, and they've built a winning culture at Toledo. It seems like year in and year out they can roll in and win 8 or 9 games without even having to try that hard. I'm not a fan of Jason Candle. I think his in-game situational coaching has shown a repetitive nature of making mistakes, and in-game mismanagement has cost them games at times. And he's won 1 MAC title. Golly, you could argue that he should probably have won 4 or 5 MAC titles with all the talent they've had at Toledo. And I think this year will really be an interesting year of kind of the reset with them, especially on offense, right? All 5 starters are new on the offensive line. They're going to have a new quarterback, although he has played Tucker Gleason. Mm-hmm. And the team, and Jason Candle made mention of this at MAC Media Days, that they do have full confidence in Gleason to step in on day one and get the job done. But there's a lot of losses in the receiver or the running back room, and be okay at the skill positions, I think. And they'll also be okay on defense. But again, their defensive level of play was so good by MAC standards that I think they're coming back down to the pack. And so you have team 1A and 1B that are kind of regressing back to the rest of the group, which could open up the conference for some real excitement when we get into conference play. The interesting thing about Toledo is they're going to have a couple of easier games to kind of figure out the offensive woes and try to find a rhythm before they really get into the meat and potatoes of their schedule. You know, they host Duquesne and then they host UMass. After those first couple of games, they should really get a good feel for what they want to do. And so I think that it may not necessarily cost Toledo a game with the recycling of personnel, but I've got to see more from Jason Candle and from their staff, which they have a consistent staff. The coordinators have been there forever. They've got continuity in the coordinator room, and they have people that have been around the program for some time. But what I find interesting is if it happens once, it's kind of a, whoa, what happened? If it happens twice, okay, maybe it's a coincidence. 3 or 4 times, it's a problem. Yeah. They lose games that they have no business losing. And every once in a while, every year, it seems like they're 2 or 3 touchdown favorites, and you look up and they're down by 10. It's like, what are they messing around with this team for? It was Bowling Green a couple years ago, Colorado State. I mean, just look through the schedule year in and year out, and they're losing game. Ball State in 2020. I mean, there's a ton of examples of games that they lose that they shouldn't. And so I have to believe that until we see that not happen, it's going to happen again, and could cost them a chance to get back to Detroit.
I agree. I do think they should probably be the favorite. I get why they're not, but I still think they're probably the best team going into the year. The schedule does set up nicer for them, I think, than Miami of Ohio, because They play their non-con. First of all, their non-con, they do play at Mississippi State where they're probably going to lose, but I don't know. It's still, that's
Could be a
the
10-point spread or so not
yeah,
out of the question.
I wouldn't say that's like an insurmountable SEC matchup.
Yeah.
Play at Western Kentucky, road game, but I do actually think Toledo's better than Western Kentucky, so we'll see. Then you get your bye before Miami, Ohio. So we were just talking about that game before. That's a huge statement game. It's a nicely paced out schedule that Gleason, who has been in the program and has some playing time. So I do think that the offense, the talent's there for it to hold up, and the defensive line can really wreak some havoc. That I think that what I'm trying to say is I think I'm still more confident than Toledo, than Miami of Ohio, given the questions each team has. But like you said, like, again, I'm not itching to pull the trigger at 3-1 because I do think that there's too many coaching issues that could cost a team like Toledo a game or two down the stretch where you need that in a conference that, again, is really bunched together. But no, you go.
And the schedule sets up nicely. If you look at their MAC road games at Buffalo, at Northern Illinois, at Eastern Michigan, at Akron, they'll be favorites in every one of those road games. And they're a really solid team at home throughout the years. And so the schedule makers did do them some favors this year. So it may not be as noticeable a drop off. And another thing too, the defensive line should quite be probably the best defensive line in the MAC, and the MAC overall is a league where the quarterback passing levels are just down, right? It's a league that struggles to pass the ball with the exception of Gabbert when he's healthy. Mm-hmm. And then you've kind of got this B- or C+ type of quarterback play. So when you have a really solid defensive line that can get in the backfield and create havoc, it is a much more magnified unfair advantage in the MAC than maybe other leagues.
Yeah, 100%. A team that, we're talking about coaching, and we think Chuck Martin's been one of the better ones. We think Jason Candle maybe isn't making the most of his talent. Loeffler at Bowling Green, I'm starting to think okay, there are some regression prone stats. They were number 1 in the country last year in turnovers gained. But they had 33 sacks last year and were an elite run defense. And that's now a few years in a row now that's been a thing with Bowling Green, where this team has havoc makers. They get in the backfield, they run the ball really well, and they stop the run really well. Maybe Bowling Green is just becoming a team that needs to be pushed up into that, I wouldn't say top tier necessarily, but that upper middle tier of teams. They're 650 to win the MAC. Their win total sits at a pretty healthy 6.5. It's shaded towards the under because of a difficult non-con, but this team returns Terrion Stewart, who, if he didn't get hurt at the middle of last year, MAC player of the year, maybe. He averaged 6 yards a carry. He's a stud. Connor Bazelak throws a lot of interceptions, but I think for MAC levels is fine. They lose their top 3 wide receivers, get their first team all MAC tight end back. But I think this Bowling Green is a pretty steady floor. I think that we can expect at least bowl eligibility. It's, can they now push into that higher tier, Duck? How do you see it with the Falcons this year?
Well, let's not brush over Harold Fannin. That guy is a matchup nightmare in the MAC, and a guy that I believe could get drafted. That guy is absolutely NFL quality, 6th round type of tight end. That guy is really going to have a breakout season for Bowling Green, in my opinion. And I think that the natural progression for this team is to take that next step, right? They really had some tough years under Loeffler. The administration stayed with Loeffler. They extended his contract even when the team wasn't winning. They were 4-8 in 21, 6-7 in 22, 7-6 last year. So that next step for Bowling Green is let's get over the hump and let's enter into that upper echelon top tier in the MAC, which I firmly believe they're going to be able to do that. Now, they do lose skill guys, and that's kind of a concern, but they've got some transfers in from the P5 level that they're really excited about. Running back, like you had mentioned, Terrion Stewart is dynamic when he's healthy. And what I'm interested to see is their backup quarterback, Camden North. He's kind of a power runner that they have some different packages for him. I want to see more of him this year. I want them to use him in different ways because he was really explosive, and he is a very, very serviceable backup, not only by MAC standards, but by any standards. So if Bazelak does go down, or if they have to turn to the number 2 guy for whatever reason, I have full confidence in Camden North to get the job done. Defensively, I think they'll be just fine. I think that, like you had said, that Bowling Green defense has just continued to improve year in and year out. And yeah, they've got probably, outside of the linebacker core, I mean, definitely top 2 or 3 D lines in the MAC. and should be okay at defensive back. Again, you're playing in a league where quarterbacks really struggle to find open receivers, and it's not as big of a passing threat as other conferences that we've come to know and love, like the Big 12 and the Pac-12. So I think Bowling Green will be right there. I think it's interesting that people see their regular season win total, which has been shaded to the under, and they see that they are at Penn State and at Texas A&M, and they're like, no, they're not going to win those games. It's going to be an easy under. But I don't know. I think Bowling Green is definitely a play-on team. And actually, that is a play that I have in pocket. I have Bowling Green to win the MAC. I took it earlier in the summer at plus 800, but even at plus 700, I think Bowling Green is right there. I think they're within about 5 or 6 points of both Miami and Toledo, and would not surprise me at all if they find their way to the MAC championship game this year in Detroit.
So again, the schedule is difficult because they play Penn State and Texas A&M, so it looks a little tougher. It's tougher to stomach taking a win total when you're like, well, they're going to lose 2 games off the bat. It does hurt. It's also worth noting, though, that Bowling Green's schedule, I think we could make an argument. Yes, they go to Toledo, but Toledo's coming off back-to-back road games at Buffalo and at Northern Illinois. And then the week before that, they play Miami of Ohio, which I imagine is kind of their big rah-rah spot. So tough little 3-game stretch for Toledo before they play Bowling Green. Meanwhile, Bowling Green is home for Kent State the week before. I think we could argue, though, that the MAC will be decided on Bowling Green's home field because they host Northern Illinois, they host Western Michigan, who's everyone's darling, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit, and they host Miami of Ohio on the last game of the season, those 3. So I do think if they're able to swing a few of those one-possession games, there is your MAC, at least title game participant. I won't say that they win the MAC, but they'll make it, and we'll see what happens. One concern, though, Duck, and I want to run this by you. So they open Fordham. They're going to win. They go to Penn State. They're going to lose. They get their bye. They come out of a bye to play Texas A&M. And then it's 5 games, with the 5th game being that at Toledo. Is there any concern of maybe like marginal, like diminishing returns almost, where it's a lot of like the Texas A&M game kind of throws them off, and they, a lot of banged up physical game. You're still playing an SEC opponent, even if you're going to lose. Does that wear and tear maybe stop them a little short of what they want to do?
Maybe. I mean, they've got to add Akron in there. They've got Kent State in there. So there are some potential spots to exhale, especially since you're playing 2 of the weaker teams in the MAC. And I don't know. I definitely have that Toledo game circled as a game where they absolutely empty the tank, and it's a max effort. Yeah. And that's really where that's the first hinge in the door in their season, right? And they'll get a bye after that. And so I think if they can kind of segment their schedule with these pocket of games that they have, 4 or 5 games in a row before their second bye, yeah, there is fatigue and there is injuries and being banged up, but I think everyone's going to go through that. And if it's a war of attrition, I think Bowling Green will be okay. Yeah, I think that it is a concern, but you're also running with some of those concerns at a plus 800 or plus 700 as well, as 100%. Opposed to a team that is a lot shorter favorite at plus 230 or plus 290.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that there's more stability on this team, especially with the defense. And again, when you were going through the record, it might not be the most like plus EV thing, but you see the trajectory of a program. You see I believe you said, what was it, 4-6 or whatever it was, 4-6, 6-7, 7-6. You're starting to see the things stacked together, and you look at how much is back on this Bowling Green roster. We got, where are we at here? We're at 28th in overall returning production, and it's impactful. This is a team that, in terms of like net success rate, top half of the country, EPA margin, top half of the country. And this is a team that was above average for a MAC team. I think there's a lot to like with the Falcons. A team I have noticed getting the most love, I believe, is like that, like I guess we could call them dark horses, right? Like the team that could upset the top 2 is Western Michigan. They're 15th in returning production this year. They return a lot of players of substance. Buckley, near 1,000-yard rusher. Wolf is back at quarterback. The defense was abysmal last year, but again, there's a lot back. So I always find it interesting, the returning production conversation. This team was really bad last year, though. They were 111th in EPA per play on offense. I mentioned the defense was terrible. They were 129th in line yards. They allowed over 6 yards per play. So there's a lot back. Does that necessarily mean that this is all going to get much better? Because they promoted, they have 2 new coordinators. The defense brings in Power from La Tech, very aggressive.
Yep.
I don't know if that's necessarily going to work for a team that's a little like in this league. Like maybe you win the turnover margin, you have like that luck, but that also leaves you susceptible to explosive plays. On offense, I think Buckley's pretty good. I don't think Wolf is very good. And you have pretty antiquated coordinator in Walt Bell running the offense now. So I see a lot of love for Western Michigan. They're at the same odds as Bowling Green. I see this a lot where people love the returning production. You need to kind of make sure the production at least has proven, at least in my opinion, it's a little bit more proven. I don't see this necessarily. So I'm not necessarily going under Western Michigan because we're going to get into the schedule a little bit, but call me a seller on Western Michigan stock going into this year.
Yeah, and it's fair. I think last year they were in such a tough spot because they had a brand new coach, they had a new quarterback to the system, and they had almost dead last in returning production last year, and that showed early in the season, right? Blown out by Syracuse, blown out by Iowa, blown out by Toledo, and it was just a really tough start. And you had new players in new schemes with a new coach, and they're all kind of looking around saying, okay, where do we go from here? There's really nothing left on the drawing board. And then they had a bye week last year, and they kind of circled the wagons, and then it was their game at Mississippi State that they really competed well in, and you could kind of start to see Western Michigan start to get it. And then they were huge underdogs at Ohio, which was, of course, one of the MAC darlings last year, and they lost by 3 points. And then they win the Michigan MAC title. And for those that don't know, the Michigan MAC title between Western, Central, and Eastern Michigan, that is something that those 3 schools care about really tremendously. And so that really solidified their season as kind of they could draw success from that and really gave them some momentum coming into this season. So I think second year under Lance Taylor is a player's coach, right? He's really building some powerful culture inside that locker room. They love what he says. He was really passionate about his team at MAC Media Days. And so I really think that the trajectory of what they're doing and what they're building is something to be pretty excited about. Now, I don't know that they're going to win the MAC. I think if you looked at the odds from earlier in the summer, about plus 1,000 or so, that was a little bit more palpable for me. At 700, I don't know. I think they're going to be better than they were last year, but I'm not necessarily willing to call them a team that's going to compete to knock off all the other teams that are ahead of them in the MAC.
Yeah, it's like a perception thing, right? Because we think maybe there's some improvement, there is returning production, but now all of a sudden this team's being priced the same way as Bowling Green, who we were just talking about that trajectory, that they're in year 4 of that upward swing. This is Western Michigan in year 2, and you could almost call it year 1 because last year was like almost a throwaway year. It almost didn't even count for anything. Schedule, they open at Wisconsin, at Ohio State. And sure, they get Bethune-Cookman in a bye, so it helps, but it's going to be tough for them to establish a lot of momentum before they get anything rolling in the MAC. They go to Marshall out of their bye. Though they will be underdogs, winnable game, but they will be underdogs. At Ball State, who I think is down this year, home Akron, at Buffalo, home Kent State. So there is a pathway for them to get going in the MAC here. They play, let's call it 4 bottom, ish teams, 4 bottom tier teams. And they close relatively easy. They get a bye before they play Northern Illinois, roadies at Bowling Green, Central Michigan, and then home Eastern Michigan. So I see why the love is there because the MAC schedule is so appetizing. Yep. But I wish another team had that because I think now all of a sudden they're plus 650. The market has reacted to that easy schedule. You know what I mean? Like the book's out on them. Everybody knows Western Michigan has an easy schedule.
Yeah, and what I want to see is what's this team going to look like after they get through the Ohio State game, right? They're at Wisconsin, at Ohio State, and those are the check games where they go in and collect a check and lose by 6 touchdowns and eat their crappy pizza and get on the bus and go back to Kalamazoo, and that's just the way it's going to be. But I think I've got those 4 games in October circled as well, and that might be what can really jumpstart the second half of their season because they do play what I have as pegged the 4 worst teams in the MAC all right in a row. So maybe they start to get rolling again, and they're not going to lose the locker room because they play Central and Eastern Michigan late in the season, and so those meaningful games are still going to be for that particular team, something that they're bought into. So while I wouldn't have a strong position either way, maybe shop around if you're really wanting to be bullish on this team. Maybe shop around, and that's one thing that I would recommend for anybody who's new or experienced to sports betting. The quickest and easiest way that you can improve your position as a sports bettor is to shop around, get the best lines, get the best juice on these regular season wins, and you'll be surprised. There's a lot of books out there at 6.5. You can find a 6. You can find an over 6 flat. If you want the over, get an over 6 flat. I value a half a win at about 60 cents or 70 cents or so. And so you can kind of price that and do the math on what is the better position. But I think time will tell on Western. There's a lot to like about the schedule. And so they might peak. Their first 4 games outside of Bethune-Cookman could be rough. But I think that it's right around 6 or 7 wins seems about right for me. So not a strong position either way, but does seem about right. One thing I will say otherwise about Western is there are some teams throughout the FBS that kind of have differing perspectives on how they treat their FCS game. And some of those teams like Eastern Michigan really struggle with FCS. Other teams, they really don't care. They use it as a roster game to get everybody on the roster into the game and get snaps for the second and third team participants. Western Michigan is not one of those teams. They put the pedal to the metal all year. And so if you look at the last several times they've played an FCS, in 2019, blasted Monmouth. 2021, blasted Illinois State. 2022, blasted New Hampshire. And last year against St. Francis, blasted them too. And 4-0 ATS their last 4. So a play-on position for Western Michigan could certainly be that Bethune-Cookman game. If you see them laying 30 or less, drop the hammer because they're gonna put up a big number themselves on Bethune. So just one of those teams that really maximizes their chance than their snaps against FCS.
Hopefully they make it through the Wisconsin and Ohio State game relatively healthy, where they kind of they're almost looking forward to just getting through those games, getting the checks, and getting onto that matchup against Bethune-Cookman. Good stuff there from Duck. Northern Illinois is a team that, like, to me, I would rate higher than Western Michigan. I know Rocky Lombardi leaves. I'm interested if they go. This is a fall camp. I'm keeping an eye on Jalen Mackin from Arkansas Pine Bluff, 6'5", 230 pounds. I'm interested if he wins the job over the veteran backup Ethan Hampton, who isn't terrible in his own right for Mac standards. He does have some playing time. This team brings back a lot. They bring back Antonio Brown, who was first team All-MAC last season.
Great running back.
Wide receiver Tavon Rudolph, 4 starters back on an already sturdy offensive line. Grayson Barnes, another guy to watch on the offense. The defense was elite last season, top 20 in EPA per pass. Some guys need to be replaced in the secondary and also their best pass rusher. But I think this team has a lot to like here on a game-to-game basis, though, because the schedule is pretty unappetizing, which we'll get into in a sec. Duck, how do you rate the Huskies going into this season? They're 750 to win the conference, win total hanging around 6.5, pretty close to your -1, shaded towards the over very slightly.
Yeah, Rocky Lombardi not back for year 8. His eligibility is exhausted, and Macon didn't really play that overly well at FCS Arkansas Pine Bluff either. So it'll be real interested to see who gets the call, but they're slated to have Macon be the starter, and I'll be real interested. I think NIU is a great team to bet on because they're super consistent in what they're going to get. Thomas Hammock is really comfortable hanging his hat on defense and playing really conservative offense. They want to run the ball between the tackles. It's a 60-40 run split, and then they're going to play action off of that, get the quarterback out, moving outside the pocket, and look for the deep shot. But this year, they've got a new offensive coordinator, Wesley Bashauner, who was a coordinator at the University of South Dakota and then a Division III head coach at a Division III school in Wisconsin. And that offense is different than what he is wanting to run. And so it's going to possibly be some growing pains for Northern Illinois in just trying to get some different things put together on offense because they may not use 2 and 3 tight end packages like they did for a lot of last year. And they may not necessarily be able to rely on just pounding the rock like they did game in and game out. They might still try to do that, but I don't know necessarily that it'll be the same looking Northern Illinois team that it's been over the past 3 or 4 years. Defensively, I think they're going to be fine. Jaden Dolphin's back at linebacker. They've got a decent secondary. They lose a couple guys on the D line, but they rotate 8 to 10 guys that get snaps every game throughout the D line. So they have some solid depth, and I think that they'll be just fine on the D line. So not a huge drop off there. Marginal special teams, I think that is, and in a league like the MAC, good special teams compared to bad special teams can really be a deciding factor in swinging momentum of games. And so we'll see on their special teams. Offense, I think it'd be just kind of okay, but yeah, still kind of unknown. I'm not a huge Thomas Hammock fan. I think he's okay at head coach at Northern Illinois. I think he probably could have made more with some of the teams that they had at Northern Illinois, and they're really Jekyll and Hyde, right? Like 0-6 in the 2020 season, and then bounce back to 9-5, and then 3-9, and then last year they bounced back to 7-6. And microcosm of that was their first 2 games of the season when they beat Boston College on the road as +10, and then they come home hosting FCS Southern Illinois, who's a good FCS, but you just beat Boston College. You're at home in FBS hosting an FCS team. You'd expect to win that game, and they lose. And so it's just kind of one of those things where the consistency with Northern Illinois is not there for me to really put a lot of stock in what they are trying to do, I'd say.
Yeah, schedule. I would put it as one of the tougher ones in the MAC. Again, maybe this is a game-to-game team if you could get a beat on them, but non-con, you have road games at Notre Dame and at NC State, road games in the MAC at, I think we could agree they play the 4 best teams, arguably 3 of them on the road. At Bowling Green the following week, they play Toledo. At Western Michigan off their bye, Akron, and then at Miami of Ohio on a shortened week also. So the schedule, just tough to make heads and tails of it. I think the schedule probably holds me back from maybe taking a future on them. I think maybe game to game, though, this is a team I'm interested in backing. Anything else on NIU before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, where's their 7th win, right? They're at Notre Dame, they're at NC State, at Bowling Green, they're at Miami of Ohio, they play Toledo. And if you just kind of go down the line, and if you're into the power ratings thing and you want to find these metrics that you can pull from to try to find hypotheticals on where a team's going to be, 5-7, 6-6 is kind of right where I've got them. But I don't know if I see a 7th win on the schedule from what I can tell right now. So I'm not really in a position to want to take a futures bet on them. I think week to week is definitely something that I would like to do. Northern Illinois is a great away dog. They're 5-1 the last 2 years as an away dog. They're a terrible home fave, 1-9 ATS in their last couple of seasons as a home fave, but they're an exceptional away dog. And one particular spot that I'm looking to possibly back Northern Illinois is at Notre Dame in week 2. They'll probably be catching 35, and Notre Dame will have just come off at A&M, and then the following week they're at Purdue, and that's kind of a sandwich spot. The Notre Dame-Purdue rivalry, it's a lesser-known Notre Dame rivalry, but they play for the Shillelagh Trophy, and it's kind of an important game to the long-term Notre Dame people that have been around that program for a long time. So this is kind of one of those exhale spots for Notre Dame where maybe we're not seeing them play their starters deep into the 3rd and 4th quarter, and they might extend the margin a bit. But if NIU is catching 35, which is where I project it to be, I'll certainly be taking a long look at the Huskies to go in there and make that game close. You have Northern Illinois, who recruits the Chicago area, and they'll have all those Chicago kids with a chip on their shoulder that didn't get recruited by Notre Dame, and this is their one chance to go to the Cathedral and kind of max effort. They're on a bye next. I think that's a great spot to back the Huskies.
Yeah, I just looked at my numbers before we move on. I'm 30.5. So yeah, sure, 5 touchdowns. I'm down. Notre Dame also, like, still not sold that offense is going to be super explosive anyway. But we're going down a tangent here now. That's honestly a really good look. A team I have a stance on is Ohio. This is a team that won 10 games back-to-back years. This is not the same team that has won 10 games back-to-back years. This is a full do-over here. They lose more than 60% of offensive production. The defense also loses a ton. This is a team that's bottom 10 in terms of overall returning production, according to ESPN. 2 years ago, it was an explosive offense led by Curtis Rourke. Rourke, this is a team I bet on to win the MAC then. Rourke busted knee at the end of the year, ruins that future, much to my chagrin. Last year, Rourke didn't look the same. Still was a decent offense. They still had some good skill position players. They're all gone. It was the defense last year that was amazing. They allowed more than 20 points just twice, and that's when they lost. They were top 10 in EPA per play. They beat Iowa State. This was an unbelievable season out of Ohio. Again, 126 in returning production now. So I think you got to throw out those 10-win seasons. Yet the market, maybe due to a softer schedule, is win total 6.5. Conference outright is 12-1. I'm under because I think when a team gets gutted like this, even if the schedule is a little bit soft, you're losing QB1, RB1, wide receiver 1, 2, 3, offensive line. You're losing your best players on defense. You're just losing so much that even if they go bowling, it is a successful year for Tim Albin in Ohio. This is just you have to go under here. I mean, my numbers are way under, but that's a lot of baked into what's gone from this team. I understand that they looked good in the bowl game against Georgia Southern. I don't put much stock into that. I don't believe that they found something there. I think this team is going to take a serious step back.
Yeah, I mean, Tim Albin, year 4, was in a tough spot when he came in after Frank Solich ducked out, and he's done really well with what he's been handed. This year, I think, is going to look a lot different. Like you said, Curtis Rourke off to Indiana, running back Bangura off to Minnesota. Wiggless, their stud receiver, graduated. Jones transferred. One of the lesser-known transfers, but Kazmarek, their tight end, transferred to Ohio State, and he shined in the spring game. He's a guy who's going to see significant snaps at Ohio State, and so that's a big talent loss. When you have a guy go from the MAC to the Big Ten and he's going to play, that's a big loss. They're going to be weaker on the front 7 on defense, and they're really up against it from a personnel standpoint. So this is one particular team that I have a position on. I have a regular season win under 6.5 at -105, and I feel really comfortable about my position. Now, when you dive into the schedule, I'm a little less comfortable, but I feel as though they've got a tough non-conference. They're going to play an FCS like all these other MAC teams do, but at Syracuse, in an environment that's going to be really loud, where there's going to be a talent disparity. They're not going to be able to communicate on the field as if they would be in a MAC stadium, and you're breaking in a new quarterback, you're breaking in some new receivers. It's going to be tough for them, I think, going in that game. South Alabama is going to be a lot better, and South Alabama was much better than 6-6 last year. If you look at the metrics on South Alabama, they should have been a 9-win team, and so I think South Alabama is going to be a really tough game at Kentucky. They'll get into the meat and potatoes of MAC play, and they do have an easy MAC schedule, like you said. Yeah. They get Akron, they get Kent State, they get Ball State, they get Buffalo. So there are some spots where they can win some games, but the losses, in my opinion, are just too drastic to assume that they're going to roll through that MAC slate without any hiccups. It's a team that hasn't won the MAC since 1968. Yeah. Unbelievably enough. I think they've been to the MAC championship game 7 or 8 times since then, and no MAC title since 1968. So I don't think it's going to be this year either.
Yeah, you're talking Syracuse. I'll look while we're talking, but I bet Syracuse in week 1. That is, talk about a mismatch. And I think Syracuse, I know this is an ACC preview, but Syracuse might be a team with the athleticism and the talent that they can really beat up on some lesser talent, inferior competition, like in Ohio. I think Syracuse can I think they're incentivized to put up a big number there. Week 1, new coaching staff, McCord, all that. I think that they would like to run it up, and I also think that they can, because I don't really know if Ohio has the horses to hang with them over 60 minutes. So I agree with you 100%. They also play Kentucky in the non-con, and I know one of their winnable games is Akron at home. That comes after going to Kentucky. I know Akron's terrible. We're going to talk about them. I think Akron might end up being not great, but a little better than the win total would suggest. They get Buffalo at home. That's after 2 road games against Central Michigan and Miami. Mm-hmm. I think that this is a mulligan type year for Tim Albin and Ohio. So I like that we see eye to eye there on the Bobs, maybe a step back. You can't overcome that type of losses on both sides of the ball after 2 great years.
No, you
The
can't.
the last team in this, I'll call it the middle tier of the MAC, is Central Michigan. We'll see how this goes. They get the Iowa transfer, Joey Labas. They also had Bert Emanuel there, who I was excited about. Bert last year didn't really come together all that much, but maybe it clicks this year. We'll see. Another offseason. They bring back their top 2 rushers, including Luke's, who I like. Pass game wasn't great, but all 3 guys are back. And keep an eye on this Valpo transfer. Duck, you seem to be a little bit more well-versed on the FCS ranks, but Solomon Davis, maybe a guy to watch there. If the passing, we'll see how Labas does, however you say it, from Iowa. We'll see if maybe he could ignite this passing game. They get a transfer from Wisconsin, Tommy McIntosh. Offensive line, they do lose an all-MAC guard and Pal Woods, but pretty solid overall. Defense is the issue, though. Team was 117th in yards per play, 126th in EPA per play. They only forced 8 turnovers. So maybe they get a little bit of a bounce here. So I can see the upside here for Central Michigan, right? There's some talent on offense. The defense maybe takes a step forward, gets a little bit of turnover luck. Do you see it clicking this year? Again, we're looking at a win total in the neighborhood of 5.5, shaded towards that over. So bowl seems to be within reach. Do you think they could get there?
I don't know. Something seems to be going on at Central Michigan that I can't quite put my finger on, right? If you look back to 2021, they were 9-4 in the MAC, one of the better teams in that league, beat Washington State in the Sun Bowl, and you're thinking that, man, the trajectory for this team is just going to be – and hasn't happened. 4-8 and 5-7, a couple subpar years. Now, Jim McElwain did own that at Mac Media Days, and he said it was on him, and your record is kind of what you say, what you see that the record is, that's what you are. And so I think he recognizes that some things have to change. He likes his offensive line. He feels that they're going to be guys that are going to be able to push people around. I kind of want to see it, right? I really wanted to see more out of Bert Emanuel last year, and I wanted to see them use him a lot more effectively than what they could have, because that's just an athlete that at this level has to be on the field and has to have the ball in his hands. And when he does do that, you've seen time and time again with them, he's really explosive. Now, let's take a pause here for a minute, because they brought in a transfer quarterback from Iowa that they like, and we know what Iowa's done for the last several years on offense. So I don't know. I'm not sold that Joey Labaz is the answer at the quarterback position. But I think that their season starts and ends with how they're going to perform on defense. And you look at what they did last year, and their pass defense was just so horrific. I mean, New Hampshire's quarterback threw for 500 yards against them, and they could just not stop the pass. They couldn't get off the field on 3rd down, and they couldn't stop teams from moving the football. It was really really shocking in some games to just watch that they were so inept with their back 7 in pass coverage. So they've got to shore that up. I think the front 7 on D will be okay. They got a stud corner, Dante Kent, who, I mean, we'll see. Can't do it all himself, though. He can't cover 3 or 4 guys by himself. So what I want to see from them is their game in week 2 at Florida International will be a real tell for where their defense is at. Now, Florida International had a quarterback pass for 4 yards in a game last year, and they Grayson James was who they had, and then they switched quarterbacks midway through the year, and their other quarterbacks were okay. But if Central Michigan gets exploited against the FIU and their weak pass offense, it's going to be a long season for the Chippewas, I think. So I think the schedule in MAC play kind of tough, No Buffalo, no Akron, no Kent State. They got 4 teams off a bye. Ohio off a bye, Bowling Green off a bye, Northern Illinois off a bye. San Diego State's a tough team in transition with some new offense, and we'll get into them in a later podcast. But I don't know. I'm not sold on this team getting to bowl eligibility. The regular season win seems about right, but I'm not as optimistic on Central Michigan.
Yeah, I think you could look at it both ways, right? Like you could see it clicking, you could see maybe some turnover regression. Ultimately, I lean towards the under probably. I'm like 5.1, 5.09, 5.1, but I don't want to go under because like I see the causes for optimism. I could see it clicking. But like you said, maybe early in the year you could get a tell on this team and where they're going, given how it went last year and the state of the team. So we'll see how it goes for Central Michigan in 24. Now And I agree, though, they should be put in like this middle tier, maybe a step down. Maybe Ohio and Central Michigan are a little too close to that next tier, but no need to be nitpicky. Next team is, we see a drop, though. Eastern Michigan's 31-1 to win the conference. I don't know how this team got to a bowl last year, and I think we realized that in the bowl game where they lost to South Alabama's backups like 65-0.
And it wasn't even that close. It was just they threw in the towel early.
Yeah. Chris Creighton, I think, is a good coach to back as an underdog, big underdog especially. But this team was really bad last year, and the market knows that their win total is 4.5. They were bottom 5 in EPA per play. They go to Cole Snyder, we believe is going to be taking over the job from Buffalo. He just led a 3-9 Buffalo team, so I'm not sure what's happening for Cole Snyder, even at the MAC level, which is a sign to maybe look for other lines of work. They lose a ton also. Dante McMillan is a guy to keep an eye on from Weber State, but you're losing a lot of guys. The offensive line is limited. To me, it was the defense that really buoyed this team. Top 30 in red zone touchdown percentage. That's usually a thing I look to not keep up year over year. That tends to regress. Jefferson, a bit undersized. He's talented on the line. They do need to replace their top 2 linebackers. Creighton is a good special teams coach. That's always been a strength of his. But look, this is a team that has 100th in net EPA per play last year, 111th in net yards per play. I mean, where is this team going? They scored more than 28 points twice last year. And I don't think the offense is getting better. So win total 4.5. Are we good here? This is fine. We can let it be. And maybe this team is just bad. Or do you think that maybe there's something cooking here in one direction?
Yeah, well, year 11 already for Chris Creighton, and he's done an exceptional job at Eastern Michigan. But I think we could argue that last year was his worst team since his first year there. And all of the metrics pointed to a team that was probably a 2 or 3 win team. So it's shocking how they scratched across 6 wins and got to a bowl, maybe one of the worst bowl teams ever of all time. Very, very bad when you dive into the metrics. And where's this team going? They lose their workhorse running back, Samson Evans, new quarterback. Canoe, their stud receiver from last year, is gone. And so I want to see how this team packs a punch on offense. Now, are they grasping at straws with Cole Snyder, who's kind of a journeyman, right? Was that Rutgers? Was that Buffalo? Kind of was up and down in his career. And I don't know. Maybe they're drawing from the last Buffalo quarterback that transferred and had success, and Kyle Van Treese, who went to Georgia Southern. Maybe that could happen here, but their defense was just Swiss cheese at times. Too many holes and couldn't get stuck. Now, they did, like you had alluded to, kind of bend but don't break. They were able to stop teams inside the 20, and that is kind of what kept them in games, getting stops and holding teams out of the end zone. But, they lose their top 3 linebackers, like you said. Now, JT Killen comes in from Coastal Carolina, and he could fill one of those linebacker voids and do okay. 4 guys in the secondary are gone. I don't know, man. I think this team, their regular season win total is low for a reason, and that could entice people to bet over because Chris Creighton has shown that kind of historical trend of getting this team to a bowl game. But this is another team that could be in for a rough season.
Yeah, schedule-wise, we get into it. I don't have a play on the win total, but I bet UMass in the opener at UMass. UMass is +1 right now. I don't think Eastern Michigan should be favorite. I don't think UMass should be a big favorite, but I think UMass is going to win. Just looking at last year's game, first of all, UMass, they didn't have their starting quarterback. They didn't have Fomachan. UMass lost 19-17 in that game against Eastern Michigan. In that game, UMass outgained Eastern Michigan by nearly 100 yards. We're -3 in turnovers. And on the final drive, and 2 of them were in Eastern Michigan territory, 1 of them inside the red zone. On the last drive of the game, what was essentially the last drive of the game, there was a minute left. Eastern Michigan, who needed a touchdown, they were down 17-13. Austin Smith hit a 50-yard pass to win the game. So Eastern Michigan, I think, a little overvalued even in that game. And I think the market's telling you that this team isn't very good if they're only a 1-point favorite at UMass. So that's just one thing I like from their schedule. Anything from you, Duck?
So there's a couple interesting spots. And that week 1 game at UMass, you might laugh at me, but that's going to be a great group of 5 game and a barometer for both teams. We should learn a lot about both teams in that game. And Yeah, golly. I mean, UMass, like you said, they just moved the ball up and down the field on Eastern Michigan and just blew so many chances to capitalize in that game last year. Um, really was quite shocking how they just flubbed that game away.
Yeah.
Um, I think that the only spot on the schedule that I have circled is on October 12th, they host Miami of Ohio. Now, Miami of Ohio comes off of at Northwestern, and then they play after a bye week. They have Cincinnati, who's a big rival. Then they're at the Cathedral for Notre Dame, and then they're hosting UMass on homecoming, and then they're at Toledo. And then they play their lesser known rival, Ohio, the week after this. But there's this sneaky trip up to Ypsilanti on October 12th. And it's just such an exhale spot for Miami of Ohio. And Eastern Michigan is a great dog. I assume at this point in the season, after where these teams will kind of settle in the non conference, EMU will probably be catching 14 or so. And so I think that that could be a play on spot for Eastern Michigan against the number. I'm not saying they're going to win the game. Against the number, I think that that could be a good spot to catch Miami of Ohio in this sneaky tough road spot. But otherwise, yeah, there's not a lot to like for me with Eastern Michigan outside of that one particular spot. I think they're going to struggle with Jack State. They're going to struggle with Washington. They'll probably struggle again with UMass or even lose that game on the field. And then by that point, I mean, they're going to be what they're going to be. So could be a real tough season for Eastern Michigan. But if you're going to play them as a big dog because they're a really solid underdog for sure.
Play very slow, run the ball. Like we said, they typically
great special teams
regression, but they typically are a bend don't break type defense. They keep the guys in front of them. Team that is sliding down the MAC standards, Ball State.
Yeah,
we'll see who ends up at quarterback. Siminoza looks to be the front runner over Lane Hatcher. Last report I read. Kelly, who saw plenty of time last year, he's switching over to defense. He's a DB now.
Yep.
Offense made it happen last year, but they do lose Marquez Cooper. He's off to San Diego State, rejoining Sean Lewis. He ran for 1,000 yards last year. I say a guy to like on this offense is Ty Robinson. He had a season-ending injury in week 2, 6'4" wideout, so we'll see if someone can pass the ball to him. But overall, this defense was what kept them alive, and they're outside the top 130. There's 134 teams. They're outside the top 130 in returning production on defense. So I'm not really sure where they're going. I don't have much else to say. Really, where I end up on this win total under, which is something I've taken, is the schedule is just a bear. So, Doug, I'll let you kind of give your breakdown, and then I'll read the schedule off because it is as brutal as could get.
Well, Mike knew year 9 and that MAC championship in the COVID season is looking more and more like an outlier than what could be the norm. And this is very possibly his last year. Now, 2023, their defense overperformed, and they were really what carried them and kept them in games was their solid defense, but they lose 10 starters on defense and a ton of returning production on defense. And so I don't know necessarily what they're going to draw from defensively, and on offense, question marks still, right? I mean, who's going to start at quarterback? Where are they going to lean on for the run game? They do have a tight end, Kozoil, who's really good. That they can use on third down and go over the middle and make tough catches in traffic. But at this point, I've taken a strong position on Ball State under 4.5. I just don't see the wins accumulating on this schedule. Ball State has a really, really tough draw because they have a bye week in week 1. So everyone else is playing October 31st, and Ball State sits at home. Then they host Missouri State, who Missouri State is a pretty decent FCS. Who knows how they're going to treat this year because they're actually moving up to Conference USA and the FBS, and we've seen some teams kind of take a year off during this transition period, so hard to say what Missouri State's going to be. But then 5 of the next 6 are on the road, at Miami of Florida, at Central Michigan, at James Madison. Then they host Western, they're at Kent State, and then they're at Vandy, and then homecoming. So what is that? 8 games in a row.
Yep.
And I don't see them. I think I have them favored in 3 games. And so I just don't see where the wins are going to come for Ball State when they're going to take such a step back on defense. They didn't have a lot to draw from on offense last year, and I don't see a lot to love from who they have returning this year. Their special teams is very bad. And I just feel like they're going to have to pull at least upsets as significant underdog. 4.5 to come in question. I have an under 4.5. I feel really comfortable with it. I think it's 3-9 or so for Ball State. And I don't know, does Mike make it through the year? I don't know.
Yeah, schedule, great analysis. Can't disagree there. I mean, you'd think Kent State probably the most winnable game on schedule is on the road, and again, you just mentioned you're playing a bunch of road games. So how's that
and
going?
Kent State's off a bye. Makes it tougher.
So it's as brutal as it gets. We keep chugging along though as we continue to move down the MAC. We get to Buffalo, another team, full do-over here. Pete Lembo, speaking of Ball State, he's back in the coach's chair, former Ball State coach. Teams outside top 120 and returning production. The spring game, 6 quarterbacks played. CJ Agbana is the one with experience, so I lean towards him getting the job. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion here. I don't have a strong opinion on this team. Again, there's a lot gone here. I will say that they hired Joe Bowen to be the DC from Miami of Ohio last year. So maybe the defense takes a pretty sizable, or is at least their calling card. Grant is back, or Grant is gone. I'm sorry. He had 5 interceptions last year, but 4 of the 5 guys behind him do return. So there is some depth there on the secondary. So I think the defense probably in better shape than the offense. Also, the schedule's pretty easy. Again, it's a team I'm not rushing to bet the win total over on, which currently sits at 4.5, shade towards the over. I'm not betting this win total, but I do think that there's some gettable games here. Maybe this team turns something together. They got Lafayette at home. They got UMass at home. They got Ball State at home. They got Kent State at home. They go to UConn. Not terrible. So how do you see Buffalo this year?
Well, the old adage is if you have 2 quarterbacks on your team, you really don't have one. So if you have 5 or 6 quarterbacks on your team, you probably don't have one. And I know they like Agbana, and this other guy, Jack Shields, played some too, and they're kind of high on him. But if I were in that room, I would want to nail down my guy early so we can move forward with a plan, and they're going to need a plan. Now, the markets that I have access to, I've seen 5.5 or 5 everywhere. So 4.5 could possibly change my perception slightly. Okay. But you look at the last 2 years, Buffalo has lost against FCS foes, and so you can't really even exhale at home against Lafayette, right? I think Lafayette was one of the top teams in the Patriot League last year and is certainly going to kind of empty the playbook to compete in that game. And when they've already lost against Fordham and Holy Cross, I don't know if that's a sure win. At Missouri, they're not going to win. There are some winnable games, though. Connecticut, Massachusetts, Akron, Kent State, EMU. The one I would have a feeling that they have circled in red ink. You mentioned Pete Lembo, the only new coach this year in the MAC. So one of the more consistent leagues from a head coaching perspective. Pete Lembo back in the MAC after some time coaching special teams at South Carolina. But he was the head coach at Ball State for a long time. And I'm sure that Tuesday night, November 12th game, they have circled in red ink that he'll want to win that one when they host Ball State. So that's a spot I have circled to play Buffalo. And there are some wins that are there on the schedule. I think on defense, they return a good portion of what they had last year, but they do lose Andreessen and lose a couple good pass rushers. So it'll be really tough to replace some of those guys on defense, a defense that didn't play overly well last year either. Yeah. So I think it's really one of those wild card teams where I like Pete Lembo. I like that he focuses on special teams. I think he's a solid coach that can turn it around. I don't know if the turnaround is going to happen this year, but the schedule is okay. I think that this team could be looking at maybe that Kent State game is the one that gets them to bowl eligibility. I'm not going to call for 6-6, but if there was an over 4.5, I would look at that. At 5.5, I'm not interested.
Yeah, 4.5 minus 130 at FanDuel. Duck, get over there.
I will.
I'll have to do that. Free shout out to FanDuel. So I bet Akron over wins last year, 3.5. They did not win. They did not go over that. Maybe it was 2.5, 3.5. I'm pretty sure they went 2-5 in one score games. So that sucked. This team, I don't really know what to make heads or tails of them. I'm not going under. It's worth noting they hired a new OC, Taylor Housewright, but then he stepped back in the spring.
Concerning.
So maybe Moorhead just runs the offense again because he does have an offensive background. They got Ben Finley in from Cal. He's going to complete with Underclough, who is not very good. Adams comes back from injury. He's the wide receiver. He could maybe be something of substance to this offensive line. Leaning on a lot of transfers, low expectation, but the defense did actually take a step forward. And I think that this defense, there's something to like here. They were top 40 in yards per play last year. They got Junile back at 15.5 TFLs. So the defense gave him a chance last year. I think if the offense could take a step forward, maybe this team does get over 3.5 win total. They're 65 to 1 to win the MAC. I don't think we're seeing that kind of jump. But Duck, is there room for optimism for the Zips in, I'm pretty sure it's year 3 of the Moorhead era?
Yeah, Akron is a team that I really want to love. I think when you look back to last year, they were so close to putting it together. When you look at their schedule last year and what happened with them, they lost by 3 points at Temple in a game that they certainly could have won. They lost against Indiana in 4 overtimes. They lost to Buffalo in overtime. They lost to Eastern Michigan in double overtime. They lost to Central Michigan by 7. They did lose against Miami of Ohio's 19-0, but they outgained and out first down Miami of Ohio. They competed really well in that spot. And you could start to see the pieces were kind of coming together with a much more competitive team than what Akron has fielded in the past. I really want to love Akron. Now, they might have the best defensive player in the MAC. CJ Nunnally is an exceptional rush. And so I think that he's a guy who could create some havoc. I think that they've got a couple linebackers back returning. Some of their secondary guys for Power 5, they had a guy transfer to Washington State. There was another guy, my notes here, that left to go to he went, but there was a guy in the secondary that transferred P5. So they do lose some. They have a running back that transfers, Jordan Simmons, who they love, who played at Michigan State, and so they get a bit. And Ben Finley in from Cal. So I think it'll be interesting to see who gets the call in the quarterback room. They're excited about their offensive line, although they're relying on transfers, and so I'll be interested to see how the continuity on the offensive line goes. Just to see where they're at as far as the whole totality of FBS football at this time. They're catching 50 at Ohio State. So that's kind of they're catching 50 at Ohio State. So that's kind of where they're at. And, the non-conference is brutal. At Ohio State, at Rutgers, South Carolina, those are 3 going to win. But maybe they can draw from something that with the meaningful snaps they get in that. And I don't know. I think that it's tough with that non-conference to assume they're going to compete to get to a bowl game, which they really need their fan base excited about something again. I don't think that 5-7 cuts it, and I don't know that Joe Moorhead is doing really enough to create a lot.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be some spots for this team where they're going to really surprise people and compete well. And when they're catching points in MAC play, I'll certainly look at Akron.
Yeah, the gap between
at least enough to be excited.
Yeah, the gap between Akron and like that middle isn't as great as you would think, given the win total projections and how this team might look on the surface heading into the year. So I completely agree with you. I'm not going to say like bet the win total over, but like Akron is a play on team heading into the year. I think not week 1 against Ohio State. But maybe it's week 5 if they're still breathing after they play at Ohio State, at Rutgers, and at South Carolina, maybe at Ohio. We'll see how that one looks on the Zips. The last
I was just going to say, and we haven't shared notes. This is not just groupthink, but I actually have that spot circled at 13 at Ohio on September 8th. And that's a spot where I think maybe people within the MAC take notice, and I would not be the least bit surprised if he goes out there and wins the game on the field. And if they're catching 2 touchdowns, I'll absolutely be back in the Zips. And another spot will be October 26th after their bye week. They're hosting Eastern Michigan, and that'll be another winnable game for them as well. So there are certainly some spots on the schedule where I think definitely be more than capable of competing.
Yeah, no, we're just two sharp minds, of course. So, you know, we're just two. You know, it's right there in front of you. You know, it's no, I think Akron is a team. I mean, look, I mentioned 2-5 in one-score games last year. There can easily be some bounces that go their way that turn things around. They lost at Indiana in like double overtime last year. It was absolutely
4 overtimes.
4 overtime. Sorry. So as someone who was holding a win total over ticket that stayed under,
Brutal.
that was very, very frustrating to watch.
And they blew the game late in the fourth. That didn't even have to go to overtime. They could have won it in regulation.
Oh, Duck, I know. Oh, I'm aware. Yeah, it's the team. It was a year from hell for sure. So we'll see if maybe they could turn around this year. Kent State is our final team. I don't know if there's that much to say because there's not much substance yet in what's going on here with Kenny Burns. I will say, though, that if they can figure out the quarterback situation, and it might not be pretty. I'm butchering his last name for sure. If you can notice, I butcher them all, Duck. But like Ulatowski. That was pretty close. They bring back all 5 starters on the offensive line. They get a running back transfer, Kai Thomas from Minnesota. Kristen McCray is back. He got all MAC honors. So there's stuff to like. And but the defense, which is probably the stronger part of the team, their DC stepped down in the spring. So maybe that's where this goes wrong. But I think that this team, there's 4 winnable games on the schedule. They're going to have to go 3-1, in my opinion. They host St. Francis. They host Eastern Michigan. They host Ball State. They host Akron. To get over, in my opinion, they got to go 3-1 probably to get over this 2.5. Again, I don't know if it comes together this year, but like if you squint hard enough, I think if you believe in quarterback play, upgrading, this team might be a little bit better than like 120-1 to win the MAC. Not that I'm betting on it, but like I if someone said like, yeah, this quarterback play is going to actually take a step forward, I'd be like, okay, like they're probably going to be a little bit better than this.
Yeah, I think the defense was so bad last year, and they just couldn't rely. There was nothing to draw from. I think they've got to find an identity on offense as well, right? And I think with if it is Ulatowski who comes back, big play McCray was what they call CJ McCray's solid receiver. They've got Kai Thomas who transferred in. They're going to have some pieces that might make them more competitive. When you look at the stat sheet, when you look at the scoreboard, when you're looking against the number, they might have some spots certainly. But I think it's really just one of those situations where this team has fallen on such hard times and fast since Sean Lewis left Kent State to see how far they've fallen, that they might improve to the point where this team might beat last year's team by 10 or 14 points, and they still might only win 2 or 3 games. So it's going to be really a tall order. And the non-conference does them no favors. At Pitt, at Tennessee, at Penn State. And that Tennessee spot could be an absolute bludgeoning. I mean, that might be just – I mean, I was talking to another sharp guy, and I would need 59.5 in order to even think about taking the flashes against Tennessee. And my numbers currently have that at 48. I don't know that it's enough.
What week is that?
That will be Kent State at Tennessee week 3.
You keep going. I'm going to try and pull up what I make it just for reference.
Yeah, so my numbers have that at about 48. I would need 59.5 to even think about taking Kent State because there's just not a lot on defense to draw from, and they struggle so badly in explosiveness. They give up explosive pass plays. They can't get off the field, and golly, I just don't see that particular spot or any of their non-conference spots being exceptionally great. I mean, they'll beat St. Francis, a PA, but I don't see a lot in the non-conference, and so they're going to have to pull an upset or 2 in MAC play to get over this win total, and I don't know. I think you might see them improved on the field, but I don't know if it's going to be resulting in straight-up wins.
Yeah, I completely agree. For reference, I make Tennessee 43.5. And I'm also very high on Tennessee. So I could it's probably Tennessee or pass for me there against the Golden Flash. But yeah, I think there are a few winnable games, but I don't know if it's coming together so fast for Kent State. So Duck, we've hit all the teams. I really appreciate it. You were awesome. I know that you were excited to come on, that you're getting into the podcasting game, getting invited to guest spots. So I'd love to have you on again. Best bets. I know we've kind of ran through them, but I like to recap them at the end of every episode. So for me, 2 week one plays, I've kind of been shouting a few out just before they move. And for people listening, in week one, I bet Syracuse minus 14.5. It might be 15.5 and out. That's still good. Anything to 16.5 is good on Syracuse against Ohio. And I bet UMass +1 against Eastern Michigan. I know that one is still available at Caesars. So UMass, and then 2 win totals. I bet Ohio under 6.5. Best in mark is -140 at Bet365. And I bet Ball State under 4.5 wins. Best in market is -165 at FanDuel. And I'm with Duck on this one. Bowling Green to win the MAC, 7-1. I found. I believe Duck has a little bit better, but I see 7-1 at Bet365 as the best in market right now. But shop around as always with all these, because these things, there's no rhyme or reason to some of these pricing. So make sure you are shopping around. Duck, you were awesome. What are some of your plays that you feel comfortable sharing with the show?
Certainly. So again, this is a unique situation where we didn't really get a chance to talk or compare notes before the pod, but I currently have a Ball State under 4.5 regular season win under in pocket. I feel really comfortable with that play. I've got an Ohio under 6.5 at -105 regular season win in pocket, and I currently hold Bowling Green +800 to win the MAC, and I feel really good about our positions on those plays, and I think that the season will kind of play out in the MAC. I mean, I believe it's going to play out the way that we expect. There might be a surprise or two, but I think that we have a really good portfolio of MAC futures. I like the Syracuse play. In fact, I was shopping around on that play, and I found an offshore book somewhere in Antigua where you could get Syracuse -13.5, and that was like -116. So I did play that.
Yeah, as you should have.
I like -14. I like -15. I think that Syracuse in week one is a solid play. I personally have not bet UMass, but I can see the logic. I can see a certain path to where UMass opens up that game and really learns from last year's game and the mistakes and the flubs where they didn't score a lot of points, but they had a lot of yards accumulated. I think an over could be there. I think Eastern Michigan's defense is going to take such a step back that I think that you've got a total of 48.5, which is kind of really spirited on how last year's teams played. But I think that I could be talked into an over 48.5 in that matchup, but certainly nothing against UMass at a pick'em or a short dog position at home.
If you remember, I believe it was UMass New Mexico State last year in week 0. This is all off the top of my head, but that game was incredible. I think UMass smoked New Mexico State, or New Mexico State smoked UMass.
No, UMass blitzed them.
Yeah, so maybe it's a early season. UMass spends all summer prepping for that opener. So maybe, I hope we're both right in terms of over, UMass to win. Maybe it's more UMass team total, but I could see your line of thinking as well. I think we're swimming in the right direction, just a little bit different lane.
Yep, I think for sure. Yeah, that's definitely a good position and a good spot to isolate UMass.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Duck, if you're all good, man, we can get out of here. Again, I'd love to have you on the show again. We can follow you on Twitter at StepOnADuck. If you are into that sort of thing, your covers, you're just kind of post whenever. Is there any sort of cadence to that, or is that just when you're posting whenever the timing's right?
Covers, Capping the Game, the RX forum, all the major gambling forums. I post weekly. I post discussion forums. So we talk about the state of college football, futures plays, had my regular season win card up from early on in the summer. And that's another thing, right, is a lot of people in the kind of that dead zone of summer, right? They're betting baseball, they're betting on tennis, they're betting on the Olympics, they're betting on all this stuff. I'm college football 250 days a year. And so I'm in the lab like you are, really hitting the research and diving into the metrics and diving into the publications and getting a perception on these teams and these conferences so we can be one step ahead, which is really what it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach. All my plays in real time on the betstamp at RW33. And every play that was just shared and everything from conference previews are in the Google Doc below. We will be back next week. We got 2 more episodes before we get to week 0. We got a college football playoff Heisman Futures Outlook episode. And we're going to do a special My Guy, Not My Guy ahead of the season with a returning guest. Duck, until next time, guys, stay in touch. Really appreciate the time, man.